Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. We get down to yet another elimination race, and if you thought Talladega was unpredictable last weekend with Ryan Blaney grabbing the checkered flag, you ain't seen nothing yet compared to what the Roval can offer up and what we've seen over the last couple of seasons. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor, my esteemed colleague and co-host on this very program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, I guess Talladega didn't disappoint, and I'm probably kicking ourselves that we don't have any exposure to Ryan Blaney, since we said this was the phase of the postseason where the 12 car could potentially do some damage.
Yeah, we definitely talked about it. It was just a matter of him executing. Clearly, he's an elite road course racer restrictor plate, super speedway, whatever Talladega is that an oval? Is that a road course? Yeah, no,
I think it's called super speedway racing. I don't know if we're allowed to say restrictor plate anymore.
Yeah, he's clearly an elite driver when it comes to that. So he definitely needs to have the respect. I think that there were some guys out there that cashed some 12 or 12 to 14 to 1 tickets. Congratulations to them. More importantly, if you were able to nibble that 25 to 1, I think that we talked about last week, you have to be sitting nicely. Now, I don't know how much further he can go in the next round, but he's at least punched that ticket along with William Byron. And there's a lot of other drivers, with the exception of Denny Hamlin, that are nervous heading into this week at the Roval, where points change so quickly on a late race restart. It's almost like mind-bending trying to keep track. Because remember, the laps are a minute and a half long. So yep. you could go from in to out, which is what happened to Larson and to Briscoe last year. So I'm excited to see how it unfolds. I don't know how excited I am to dump a bunch of money on the race at this point.
Oh, we'll figure that out. Hopefully there are some opportunities that present themselves, and obviously the numbers will dictate all of those financial decisions. Quick reminder to those listeners of the Stay Green podcast, we break things up around these parts. Stage one, normally it would be a race recap, but since everything we saw at Talladega is absolutely useless in terms of what we learned and can apply going forward, we'll throw that off to the side. And stage one would be all about the updated playoff odds. Stage two, a little bit of a philosophy about handicapping the Roval and some of your expectations going in there. And stage three, as we look to preview the drivers to watch this weekend for the Bank of America 400. So Wormser, stage one, when it comes to updated playoff odds, we know two drivers who are moving on to the round of 8. William Byron clinched. His price is 9-2. Ryan Blaney's number has come all the way down. He's right around 8-1. You can shop around. I have seen some 9s out there as well. Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin both at 9-2, but Denny Hamlin a lot more breathing room as he's 50 points clear of the cut line, whereas Kyle Larson 15 points clear. Would have been a little bit better for Larson had he not gotten caught up in a little bit of a dust up in the waning stages of Talladega. Martin Truex Jr. 11-2. He's 17 points clear, and that's where things start to get interesting with Chris Buescher and Christopher Bell both at 9-1. Tyler Reddick on the wrong side of the cut line, but he's priced at 16-1, a shorter number than Brad Kay, who's 2 points to the good. And if you believe in Cinderella stories or long shots, much like Christopher Bell was able to accomplish in this very race last year, Ross Chastain 40-1, Kyle Busch 45-1, and Bubba Wallace at 100-1. When you look at these prices, suffice to say, I can't imagine you're running to the window to bet any of these favorites, but honestly, Worm, I'm mildly intrigued by Denny Hamlin at 9-2. I'm not quite sure where these prices are going to go. And knowing that we have a couple mile and a halves, we have Martinsville coming up, there's a legitimate shot that 9-2 could be the best price. Or do you think 9-2 is going to be widely available for us on the 11 when he mathematically clears that hurdle and can head into Las Vegas, knowing that he needs a win to punch his ticket to Phoenix?
I think a lot of that hinges on whether Kyle Larson gets through. I think that if Larson gets through, you're going to make him a co-favorite, and I still think you'll see Hamlin and Byron kind of stay around those three as the co-favorites. But if Larson doesn't get through, I think you have to make Denny Hamlin the favorite, right next to William Byron at probably a shorter price, unless Truex were to show something at the Roval, which he just hasn't. I mean, he hasn't had speed at all in these playoffs, and he's had a little bad luck. I think that those guys have to be the clear favorites, and I don't know who competes with Denny Hamlin over the next three races, if it's Las Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville. Where Denny will struggle is at Phoenix. I do think that Byron has the leg up there, but I also think that Denny has kind of a clearer path to get there. So I don't mind Hamlin at 92. I also don't mind Byron at 92, and those are both guys where I'm naked. I have nothing on those two drivers. I do have a little bit on Truex, but I'm not overly optimistic about where that team's at. They just haven't shown speed, and they showed a ton of it throughout the regular season. So I still think that the best value on the board, again, with going into a road course in the speed that he's shown recently on 1.5 miles, is Tyler Reddick. He is on the outside looking in. He's only 2 points just outside the cutoff. This is a road course. He's qualified well. He has the best average running position. He has the best average finish on the tracks that I would consider comparables to this week. He's just going to have to go out and execute. And that's one thing where that 45 team has struggled. You just can't make mistakes, especially in the playoffs, especially when you have little 3-race segments. But I still think that 16-1 will drop significantly if he moves on to Las Vegas in the round of 8.
I'm not going to disagree with you at all. I mean, I think the 45, when you see him on the wrong side of the cut line, may be a deterrent for some folks, but I don't want to simplify it and say it's as straightforward as a head-to-head matchup with Brad K, because look, if Ross Chastain or Kyle Busch catch a setup, suddenly the dynamic changes quite a bit. And it's not like Tyler Reddick is just chasing Brad K to get in. He's got to make up substantial ground on a Christopher Buescher or Christopher Bell, which gets to be definitely a little bit more difficult. Kyle Busch at 45-1. I have to float this out there to you. We know about the exposure you have, the listeners. I have all in that price range of 15 or 18-1. Would you nibble a little bit and try kind of weighted cost average down? Should Kyle Busch catch lightning in a bottle at a track where we'll get to how his historicals have been here, but it's not outside the realm of possibility given what we've seen from the 8 car, even before Kyle took over at RCR and it was driven by Tyler Reddick.
I think if you think that Busch has a chance to make up the 26 points, I don't know that he can point his way in. That would be really difficult, but he could definitely win his way in. Obviously, we know that. So I actually like his win price this week more at 20-1 than I do the 45-1 for the championship. I don't see how he gets to Phoenix, even if he gets through this round. So you might beat the market at this 45-1 price, but I don't see him doing much at Las Vegas, Homestead, or Martinsville. So if you do think he moves on, I think it's because of a win here this week at the Roval. So I think that you take that win price on Kyle Busch and just let this 45-1 be.
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, look, some of those numbers look attractive on the surface, but if you don't think it's going to yield any fruit in the long run, there's no sense tying up your capital for the next month if you can get in and get out knowing that Kyle Busch has to win this weekend at the Roval to even make it into the round of 8. We talk about all of these numbers, and, it may be a little bit nostalgic because NASCAR released the schedule for 2024. And when you look at the new configuration for the playoffs, I mean, you and I had the the exact same knee-jerk reaction going, I'm not sure I'm going to be betting any championship futures and tying up my money through the 26-race regular season when we now have 2 super speedways, 2 road courses, and NASCAR claiming that their elite drivers are still going to find a way through. You may as well throw everybody into a lottery machine, shake up the balls, and throw out the first 26 races unless you come through as the regular season champion and you build yourself a significant cushion.
I think that what this does is it puts more emphasis on the regular season. We've seen in the past Hendrick Motorsports get off to a quick start and then kind of test halfway through the season. They kind of disappear. I think it's quite clear that they're working on different changes they might potentially make to race cars before they get to the playoffs. I don't know that you can do that anymore. I think you need to stack on as many wins as possible and provide yourself a little safety net of playoff points if you have the ability, because, we're starting off in Atlanta. Okay.
Wake me up in March, by the way. As a sports bettor, wake me up in March. We'll bet the Clash. We'll take 3 weeks off. You can go on a nice little vacation and then come back in March when we go on the 2-race West Coast swing to Vegas and Phoenix.
Yeah, they go. And I don't like the comment. So what Todd's referring to is we start off at Daytona and then the very next week it's at Atlanta, which was great when Atlanta wasn't like a super speedway type race, a drafting type race. But what NASCAR came out and said was, we're trying to keep the racing consistent because that's what fans expect is drafting in the second, like they'd watch the Daytona 500. And then we used to go to, like Las Vegas or something, and it wasn't super speedway type racing. So they're trying to stay consistent. I don't even know what the hell that means. It just means I'm not making a bet. The Clash could present itself. I won't make a bet until Las Vegas. And I don't know that I'll make a bet for the championship until after the Roval, when who the final 8 guys are, because it's coin toss after coin toss. And we've seen in the first round of 16, we saw Truex struggle after having an amazing season. He had to work his way and barely got into the round of 12. And now you have Kyle Larson, who's been arguably the fastest guy week in and week out. He's only clear by, 19 points, or 15 points, excuse me. That's going to happen even more in this new schedule. So I know that it does take the wild card out in Texas for the playoffs, as that'll be in the spring. But you threw in Atlanta, and then you took out Darlington, and you throw in Watkins Glen. And it's like, it just favors a different type of racer. And that's why these playoffs, it's when it comes down to, just sets of 3 races or what would you call them? Just 3 race segments.
Yeah, pretty much.
There's going to be drivers that it favors. Like when Homestead was the final race of the season, that favored one driver. So whenever that happens, I do like that there's a rotation, because you could end up kind of with the same guys every year that just have great track history and tend to run well at certain places. But all of a sudden you're shoving in super speedway racing and more road courses. That's just going to favor a guy like an AJ Allmendinger for the championship. And I'm not saying he's going to go out there and compete for the championship. That's not what this is.
I mean, I may or may not have had a piece of AJ coming into this season at a price of 1,000 to 1 that I thought had a puncher's chance through all of those road courses, figuring, hey, if he can find a way just to get to the Roval. But now you're exactly right. It's a lot more intriguing, because if he does get into the playoffs, he's got a chance not in just one stage, but in 2 separate stages to go out there and win a race. Correct. Or a Michael McDowell, for example.
Yeah, McDowell's another great example. Even a guy like Austin Cindric, who runs well on the road courses and at super speedways, that's another guy where because he can get through multiple segments, and you could find yourself with one of those guys getting to the final 8 or the round of 8. And if there's issues, if drivers have other issues, they could just cruise around in 12th to 15th place, score their points. And if someone has a Truex type round, you could see them advancing. So I think it brings everybody kind of back together. I just hate the element of luck, to go back to Talladega. Watching Larson was running 5th with 50 yards to go, and he gets caught up with the 7 and the 47, and he finishes 15th instead of 5th. And stuff like that it's just a crapshoot. And I would say I dislike the super speedways more than the road courses, because, hey, road courses, they're a part of NASCAR and they're not going anywhere. So I think it's important to keep them in the playoffs. I don't know that I'd go with 2. I thought that 1 was just fine, but it just brings another element of driving style in the playoffs, and it's going to be super speedways and it's going to be road courses. So it'll be interesting. Just not my favorite to bet. I'm not going to have, when odds come out. I mean, I say that until I see odds get released.
You're going to see, you'll see a price that'll really stick out, but you're not going to go into the season looking to try and bet favorites. I mean, I can't see a scenario where you're trying to tie up your money on a Denny Hamlin, a Martin Truex Jr., or a Kyle Larson at prices less than 10 to 1. If Michael McDowell opens at 200 to 1, hypothetically, or something along those lines, then it may not be, the worst thing in the world to take a little bit of a nibble there. knowing that the drafting tracks and, of course, road courses are something that fits quite favorably into his driving subset. So I think the handicapping process there will change. But one other thing, too, and I know NASCAR has been pretty outspoken that I would like to see adjusted, the final race. Phoenix is a great venue. We know there are limited track options with where they can go, given weather constraints, especially next year where the season gets pushed a little further back, because we do get that 2-week break for, NASCAR on NBC to go on hiatus, given the Olympics. But let's rotate Phoenix, Homestead, and figure out exactly where else we can race to try and ultimately crown a champion. And Vegas is another spot that's there. Ultimately, when California gets another track that's back in the mix, to see a rotation to give a number of drivers an opportunity, because there's no worse feeling if you're a driver than going, I can't win at Phoenix. I know it's not an excuse, but somewhere along the way, there's got to be a track that everybody has a shot. And things have to break the right way for these individuals to be able to grab a piece of NASCAR immortality there. So we'll obviously pay close attention to those playoff races as we go. A little bit surprised there and slightly disappointing as well. I know NASCAR was pushing to try and get a race north of the border in Montreal. Instead, we're going back to Iowa, a track that we haven't raced in any series for the last couple of seasons. And I know IndyCar attendance there was really dwindling. So look, maybe bringing a Cup Series race to Iowa, a track owned by NASCAR, will go a long way, but was hoping for a little bit more, somewhat anticlimactic with that schedule release. Yeah. Final word to you before we kind of pivot and wave the green, white checkered flag on stage one.
Yeah, I just think from a betting standpoint, you can't look at favorites early in the season. I don't care how much speed they show. It's going to come down to, if you're going to take a favorite, it better be the guy that you think is going to stack up playoff points. Otherwise, you do need to look to these long shots that I do think will be more live. To your point, I thought it was great. It gives those road course racers or those plate racers 2 separate chances to win in 2 separate rounds. So, if anything, we'll be looking at some higher odds guys, but we'll have to see what happens in the off season. Silly season still kind of out there. And, but overall, I would say a little bit of disappointment on my end.
Oh, I can't wait for you to text me, in late December, early January, that you're betting Corey LaJoie at 1,000 to 1 to win the Cup championship, knowing that he's got plate tracks working in his favor in some capacity. All right, we're waving the green, white checkered flag on stage one. I'll encourage you to follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And we go on to stage 2, handicapping the Roval, with the reintroduction of stage breaks to try and spice things up a little bit. In your opinion, how does this change the handicap, or, if we're going glass half full, create opportunity for guys and girls like ourselves?
Well, I think you better understand the playoff picture before you make any wagers. Who needs points? And because that's the main goal. I know that everyone wants to win a race, but if you were to ask, I think if you were to just tell Kyle Larson, hey, you're going to finish 15th, but you're going to move on, I think Kyle Larson would say, okay, great, we don't have to run this race. I think you could say the same thing about Truex. You could probably say the same thing about Buescher. You could definitely say that about Reddick as the outside looking in, or Brad Kay. So think about that. You're going into a race where drivers would just take advancing. It's not like a regular season race where they're just trying to go out there, get a name on a trophy and score some points for your team for the playoffs. It's a completely different mentality. So this
for the playoff drivers, it is. It may not be a different mentality for the drivers that are just going out there trophy hunting.
But it is, right? Because in the regular season, those guys might try to stay out and get points depending on where they're at. So you look at these guys that are not in the playoffs, they are trying to win the race. So I think that, make sure that you're looking at when you're betting, especially matchups, make sure that they're not stage matchups, make sure that they're, that they're for the full race. But on that flip side, if you think that there's guys that are going to stay out and take points, those could be guys that you could fade because they're going to have a hard time working their way back up through the field. Or if you can find them in stage matchups, if you know that Kyle Larson's staying out, and you can find a stage 1 matchup on, let's just say, him over someone like, William Byron, who's locked in. Well, I think Larson would take the stage points. I certainly think he will. And I don't think Byron will. So if you can find a stage 1 matchup on Kyle Larson, you could definitely take him over William Byron, because I do think Byron will be going for the win. But on the flip side, we don't know that maybe William Byron wants a playoff point. Right now, when the points reset, it'll be him and Truex will be back to the lead. I think they're going to be tied. So that would give William Byron a 1-point advantage if both of those guys move on to the next round, or if Truex moves on to the next round, when Byron moves on. So Denny mentioned on his podcast, he'd be happy to leave with a playoff point. Well, if that's the case, it's going to be really hard for Denny to win the race. But that only depends on if Denny even has the opportunity to get that playoff point. If Denny's running, hypothetically, Denny's running 5th, and he knows that there's 4 cars ahead of him will be pitting because they don't need points. Well, then certainly Denny can stay out, he'll be clinched, I think, if he stays out and gets the 10 points plus the playoff point. I think that's a great race for Denny. Right there after stage 1, he can go balls to the wall for the win. He will have to do it through traffic, but ultimately, I think that you just don't know if Byron wants that playoff point either. So this is where inside information would be important. And it's not like these guys are broadcasting this. Denny even said, I would not broadcast what I will do anyway on my podcast. So this race, you have to pick your spots. I do think that there is an advantage to certain drivers that are going to go for the win. I think that they'll have better track position late in the race, and I think that's important. But if there's a caution with 8 to go like there was last year, all hell is going to break loose anyway, and none of it is going to matter.
I'll tell you one bet, if it's offered, that may be worth laying a substantial price. Will the stage 2 winner win the race? If you can find a good, affordable no price there, that's a ticket that I'd love to be able to put in my back pocket. So I will have my head on a swivel, hoping some sports book puts up a proposition that is not priced correctly.
Even if it's like minus 400,
I think that's a plus EV bet. I don't think you're going to be able to race your way back through the field. If you're staying out there to win stage 2, it's almost waving the white flag that you have no intentions or aspirations of winning the race, because winning that stage is much more important in terms of your ability to advance or putting that extra playoff point in the bank for the next phase. Yeah,
I agree. I think there's going to be value. It's just not at this point in the week. We have to see where these guys are going to qualify. If Hamlin qualifies, outside the top 10, I can guarantee you he ain't staying out for playoff points or a playoff point or a stage points. If he qualifies top 3 or 4, well, yeah, maybe, depending on who's ahead of him. If Kyle Larson's ahead of Denny Hamlin's pitting because Kyle Larson's staying out. So you have to there is this chess match based on current running position that you're going to have to take into account based off of qualifying. I think that that's really important. After qualifying, we'll have a really good idea of what the goals will be for guys like Denny, who could choose to stay out and take the playoff point, or Byron. And certainly like Tyler Reddick, Tyler Reddick could go out there. He could have a race winning car and have a 5 or 6 second lead. Let's just say in stage 1, I still think he's taking points. I don't know. I think Reddick has to go out there and try and race for the win, unless he thinks that Brad K is going to be shuffled way back in the field, or if hypothetically the 6 wrecks out early. I think Tyler Reddick has to go out there with the mindset that he is going to win the race, because if on Saturday you see that Ross Chastain or Kyle Busch are qualifying inside the top 10, and either one of those guys has the capability to have a race-winning car, Reddick has to go out there with the mentality that I want to control my own destiny, and I'm not going to run the risk of letting one of these guys on the outside looking in try and get past me, because it's not just racing Brad K. And I think, not to be critical of articles that I've read, people keep saying that, Tyler Reddick's only racing Brad K. No, if Ross Chastain or Kyle Busch wins, Tyler Reddick has to make sure he jumps over other drivers as well. So I don't think going out there and trying to play defense is going to be the best mentality, knowing how strong he has been at this particular discipline. Yeah, it also depends how good his car is. If it's like, hey, this is the best car by a mile and you feel comfortable, you maybe undercut and you just say, hey, we're going to go out here and because I also think that he'll get through if he finishes third. And he might not score any stage points, but I still think if he leaves with third place points, I don't see Brad Keselowski figuring out a way to score more than third place points throughout the day. I think he'd be lucky to get a few stage points. So to that point, I would agree. If you just got to stay out of trouble and hope that there's not that. The other thing too, remember that first turn has been a nightmare. And with as many cars that are going to be on the lead lap, if you find yourself in a little bit of an issue or a wreck or even spinning in that first turn, you have to let the entire field go around, and there's going to be 33 cars on the lead lap, and you're going to lose all of that track position. So I think it depends on, it's hard. It's hard. We could sit here all day with these hypotheticals. I just think that you have to pick your spots. And there's a few guys that I do have circled that I think you can make some money on that have been successful at these road courses. But anyone that's around or near the cut line is kind of a no-go zone for me at this point until we see practice or qualifying.
Well, we'll get to some of those drivers in a second. Before we close the book on stage 2, as far as track specs and track comps are concerned, obviously we go to Charlotte Motor Speedway, but we race the 1.5 mile traditional layout for the Coke 600 over the holiday weekend. When you look at the distance for the Roval, I think it's officially 2.28 miles, but depending on what websites you look at, including the track website, it's different mileage seemingly every time. 17 turns, give or take. So I'll ask you, is the Charlotte Roval similar for you to other road courses? Are there ones that you throw out? I know when we talked about Indy and Watkins Glen, we said we weren't placing emphasis on the Chicago street course. That's one that I didn't include in my handicap, but are there any of the other road courses that we've gone through to the year that you feel don't translate to the high speed that we will see on the Roval this weekend?
Well, I throw out Sonoma as well. So to your point, I keep Coda. I just think that Coda is a good translation. I keep Indy and Watkins Glen. And those are the ones, and it's hard because, people just look at road courses in general. They're so different. The street course was way different, not to mention it was in the rain in Chicago. And then Sonoma is just a different animal, a little bit more technical. It's not as fast, a little bit more tire wear. So I try to just, and that was really early in the season. I know you could say the same thing about Coda, but I just think that track does translate a little bit better than Sonoma. So I just use those 3 tracks along with just track history at the Roval because it is truly different. There's not one that just correlates 1-to-1, you could say.
No, that's fair. And I think you have to look at everything and be fluid in your handicap, obviously, as these things change in terms of what it does to season outlooks and what we can use as comparable data points to get into some of the drivers. So we wave the green, white checkered flag and we go right into stage 3. No stage breaks around these parts like NASCAR is going to give us over the weekend. So as far as the drivers to watch, Worm, look, we're at a road course. It ain't a playoff driver sitting in the catbird seat, at least the way the betting markets are represented. It's none other than NASCAR's most popular driver, the 9 car of Chase Elliott, who does have 2 wins at the Roval in 2019 and 2020, but those have been followed by 2 finishes of 12th or worse. He has the most points earned at the Roval amongst all Cup drivers. 59 laps led here in 3 races, or the last 3 is the best, but he always hasn't had the best finishes, as we've seen the last 2 trips. Chase Elliott being given an awful lot of respect in the betting market early this week.
I think he deserves the respect. I kind of like Chase here. It's a great track for him. He was going to win last year without that caution. He's the only 2-time winner at this track. And he was sneaky good at Indy, which I do think is a closer comp. He was sneaky good at Indy when he was running poorly. Like, he wasn't running fast on ovals. And he's kind of woken up here in the playoffs. I think that team has finally shown some speed. He's been able to lead some laps. And if you look at his finishes, they've, since Daytona, it's 4th, 8th, 6th, 7th, 11th, 7th. That's pretty running consistently better than some of the stuff that we saw in the middle of the year when he was, even at Atlanta, New Hampshire, Pocono, Richmond, where he was not running in the top 10. So he now has a little bit more speed. And by the way, that the owner's standings, he's in 4th. And if he wants to make something up to old Mr. H for breaking his leg, he needs to go out there and compete. So he definitely has skin in the game. Absolutely. So, this isn't one of those guys that, hey, he's not in the playoffs, you don't need to worry about him. You absolutely do, because how Rick Hendrick gets paid is how Chase Elliott will finish this season. So really important that he finishes strong. So I just don't know if he's racing for owner's stage points either. Like, I don't think they're that important. I think they'd rather leave with a win. But it'll be interesting. I do like Chase this week. I kind of thought he'd be the favorite, but the reason I do like him a little bit more is just he's been running faster lately. He's been way more competitive than he was earlier in the year.
Yeah, the 9 team has really started to identify speed, and this is a track we know he'll be extremely comfortable racing at this particular weekend. As we move further down the board, we look at Tyler Reddick and William Byron, both priced at 8-1. Tyler Reddick's finishes on the 3 comparable courses we've used to try and create some of those like-minded data points, better than 5th so far this season. So he has brought the speed week in, week out, winning at Coda. And we know this is one of his best track types. 3 starts at the Roval over the last 3 years, has never finished worse than 12th. And he's one of just 4 drivers with a driver rating during that span above 100 at the Roval. Meanwhile, William Byron, we saw him take some money early on this week, driving his price down. He dominated the last road course at Watkins Glen, pretty much got out to the lead and dusted the field. He led the second most laps at the Roval over the last 3 races here behind his teammate Chase Elliott, has the best driver rating in the series. I mean, consistent performer. The 24 has really shown himself to be right at home when we talk about making left and right turns.
I like William Byron. We'll start with him. You know, it does help he's locked in, and he doesn't have any other strategy other than maybe getting a playoff point. But if there's a chance he can't get a playoff point, there's no reason for him to not undercut the stage. He was great at Coda and was obviously great at Watkins Glen. I think William Byron's going to be tough to beat. He's been qualifying well on road courses. I expect him to be a competitor. I think that it'll come down to, you know, just making sure that they put themselves in a position, but he's been great on pit road. You know, the only time he struggles is when we bet him top 5. So I don't have anything on William Byron or anything at all at this point yet, other than the best bet, but I think Byron's going to be good. Reddick, man, there's a lot of unknowns there. Is he going to be going for the win? You know, if Brad K has an issue in stage 1, you know, I think he'll be happy to take points. So he's going to be driving with a rear view mirror strategy. Excuse me. And I do think he'll be fast. I just don't know if he's going to put himself in a position to win. I think he's trying to put himself into position to advance, and that could change from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. The 8-1 price is decent. He just has been underperforming relative to last year, in my opinion, on road courses. Just too many unknowns at this point.
No, I think it's fair. Look, I mean, you can't have strong opinions on everybody this far out sometimes. So rather than making a case for guys with such short odds, it may not warrant it, at least at this juncture of the game. Looking further down the board, there are a number of drivers in that 10-1 range. Kyle Larson, the most notable in terms of the overall playoff profile and impact this race could have. But he's also joined by AJ Allmendinger and Michael McDowell with similar numbers in the market. As far as Larson this year, road course average finish this year, a little bit misleading given some self-inflicted wounds that he suffered at Watkins Glen. Raced well at Talladega, first time maybe ever on a super speedway, but still wasn't able to get a top 10. You look at AJ Allmendinger, another driver that won't care about stage breaks. It's win or go home. You know, we thought this might be the last time that we were going to get the Roval in the schedule. Obviously, on Wednesday, we found out that that wasn't going to be the case. I mean, earned a top 5 finish here as a part-time Cup Series driver last year, earned a top 10 finish for JTD Doherty Racing here in 2018. And we know he's dominated this particular track in the Xfinity Series. And then there's Michael McDowell. I know a lot of people will default to his recent track history, but the 34 hasn't run nearly as well across a wide variety of tracks. And if one area of concern was horsepower, that hasn't been the case given the speed that we saw at Indy and we saw at Watkins Glen. So when you look at that trio of drivers, how do those guys stack up?
Well, let's start with my boy Larson. Full disclosure, my biggest championship ticket. So my notes say, if I'm Kyle Larson, I'm points racing. That's just me, though. I do think he could be, if he was already locked in, let's just say, or was comfortable, I think he would have a car capable of winning this race. And he's won here in the past, and he's also been competitive in races that he hasn't won here. So this is a good track for him. I think he has to take a page out of Byron's book here and just run a solid race. If he can score stage points in stage 1 and stage 2, and, you know, maybe end up with a 12th or 13th place finish, he's solidly into the next round, and just keep the mistakes to the minimum. I don't think you're getting paid properly at 10-1 with the type of risk you're taking on, because he will be so cautious. But this just could be a ticket holder bias showing. if you're going to get Larson, I think you're going to find a better price live, especially if he goes out there and wins a stage, which I think that Larson will qualify well, and I think he has a potential to win stage 1. If that's the case, if he's able to move back through the field, he might try to win stage 2. Or they could take this approach of, hey, if we win stage 2, but we're going to end up in 26th place and we'd only work our way back up to 15th, it makes more sense to undercut the stage and actually have a chance to win the race. They're going to figure that out from a points perspective, or at least you hope that the crew chief is going to think about those things and make sure that they're weighing their options properly. Every time I assume that a crew chief is going to make the right decision, I'm wrong. So that's kind of my thoughts on Kyle Larson. AJ Allmendinger, he's a checkers or wreckers guy, and he hasn't shown, like, he hasn't led a ton of laps on these road courses this year. I expected him to be faster. I think that Kyle has taken a sideways step this year, maybe even a step backwards. I'd like to see him more at that 14-1 price point than this 10-1. However, I feel very differently about Michael McDowell. I think this is a perfect position for this team. He had a lot of pressure on himself to go win back-to-back road course races. That wasn't going to happen. But this is a perfect spot for him. He's shown speed. He's not in the playoffs anymore. They're definitely racing for the win. And he's been great on road courses. And he's also a really aggressive driver early in these races. And I can tell you right now that if Kyle Larson out-qualifies Michael McDowell and he's coming like a bat out of hell to make the pass, Kyle Larson's going to let him go because Kyle has a lot to lose. And I think that Michael McDowell, as aggressive as he is on these road courses, he can outbreak these guys that are just going to be cautiously riding around. I expect McDowell to be up front most of the day.
Look, McDriver's been good in the past, and we'll see if he can bring it again and get his second win of the season. When we look a little bit further down the board, that's where things may start to get interesting. Martin Truex Jr. right around that 12-1 price tag. And then you see a number of drivers, let's call them 18-1, upwards of 22-1 with Daniel Suarez, Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Christopher Bell, Chris Buescher, Ty Gibbs, etc. As you begin to go into that particular tier of drivers, are there a couple you're interested in buying? Are there guys that you want to sell? Is it fair or foul the way that we're seeing Christopher Bell price, knowing that he went out there last year, had to win a race and did so, but he may not have been the model of consistency so far this year when it comes to road course racing?
That, and he hasn't shown as much speed this year. He just hasn't. And he's made more mistakes. If at what point of the race is Chris Bell going to go to the rear? Like, he's going to do it at some point, or he's going to end up with some damage. He's probably properly priced. I think that if you're looking at, my favorite guy in this price point would be Ty Gibbs. This is an aggressive bet, but this is a guy that has very solid finishes at Indy, the Glen, and Coda. I thought that he'll be hard to pass. Here's the other thing. If Ty Gibbs qualifies in the top 5, he'll be there all day. If he qualifies like 10th to 13th, I can't see him driving up through the field. But I do think if he gets track position, he's going to be hard to pass. I don't think anyone passed him all day at Watkins Glen. I do like Ty Gibbs this week. I think he's kind of itching to get that first win. I don't think he's going to be too aggressive to get a win. I think that he'd be happy with a top 5 finish. But I expect him to have a solid weekend. I expect him to practice well, qualify well, and run a good, aggressive race and put himself in position to win. So I think Ty is going to be really good this year. He has the 3rd best average finish on the 3 tracks, Glen, Coda, and Indy. So I do like Ty Gibbs. Then you get into some of these other drivers like Kyle Busch. I mean, he's got to win, but have we seen anything out of this guy that resembles competitiveness?
Absolutely not. You almost wonder what's going on elsewhere off the track. I mean, I know when he sold the race team, we kind of joked about it when he sold the truck team, citing that he wanted to spend more time with Brexton's racing career. It just feels like something's missing for Kyle Busch, whether it was last season when we thought we could attribute it to the contract dispute that was going on with JGR. But even this season, it doesn't feel like we're getting the same Kyle Busch when it comes to on-track performance. Yeah. We're definitely getting a surly Kyle Busch when he doesn't get the finishes he's expecting. But I don't think you just roll out of bed and pick those things up, given that the margin for error these days in the sport is so damn narrow.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like he's always on edge. This car just has not agreed with Kyle Busch. I go back to the comments that Tony Stewart made when he retired. And this is not me saying Kyle Busch is going to retire, but as he was retiring, someone asked why, and he goes, "I just don't know how to drive these cars." I'm beginning to wonder if Kyle Busch just struggles with these cars. It might be the fact that you have to work guys over for so long in order to make a pass, and he just gets very impatient, because that's what it seems like. It seems like he races impatiently, and as edgy as these cars are, I mean, at Texas, he was great. I said, I think Kyle Busch is going to be great this week. I also think he's the favorite to wreck out, and I'll be damned if he did. So he's going to have to, I think if for Kyle to win this week, I don't think he can just straight up. I don't think he'll have straight up the fastest car. I think it will take some, a little bit of ingenuity on pit road, if that's even possible, depending on where these cautions fall. He's going to have to take a ton of risks. I mean, if there's a caution in an ideal situation, he's running 5th or 6th, and there's a caution with 4 to go, and he can drag everyone down to pit road, and he's the first guy off with 4 tires. Otherwise, I just don't see Kyle Busch going out there and dominating the race. Denny Hamlin, pretty safe. He's 50 points clear. I mean, he's all but moving on. If the playoff point's important to him and he qualifies well, does he win stage 1 and forego an opportunity to win? I would say if I'm Denny Hamlin, I would be happy with being locked in with a playoff point starting stage 2. I don't care if you're starting in 27th. That's just me. I'm a little bit more risk averse than Denny. I'm pretty sure if he thinks he has a car worthy of winning the race, he's gonna be begging.
He's gonna go out there and try and win the damn thing. There is no doubt about it. If he knows he's got a hot rod, Denny ain't gonna race for stage points. At least if he did, I would be surprised.
Yeah, who knows? It'll be interesting again. But I like his price. He's qualified well all year at road courses, and 18 to 1's a healthy price for a guy that can go out there and be aggressive and win the race. So that's kind of my take on those guys there. Chris Buescher, again, he's going to take points. And by the way, Chris Buescher this whole year has been solidly a 5th to 11th place car in every road course race and never really been a threat to win. It's like he's just been solid all year. I think that he'll be solid this week. I don't think his top 10 prices are terrible. So I think Buescher just runs a solid race and moves on to the next round. I think that this team, to have, if they could get both RFK cars in, great, but to have one of them in the final 8 and a chance to move on to the final 4, I think Buescher kind of does have that opportunity. So I think that's going to be their concentration, not this 20 to 1 win price.
Couple of drivers on the outside of the playoffs. Alex Bowman has run here quite well in a limited sample size, like most of the series. Austin Cindric, first time maybe in a long time that his price has drifted pretty far out in terms of an overall road course. And when we look at Cindric, last week marked the first time he'd finished better than 12th since the Chicago street race. And I think it was interesting. I can't remember the article talking about, well, maybe Team Penske will put resources into Cindric to try and help get him his first win, knowing that they don't really have to be that concerned about Ryan Blaney getting to the next round of the playoffs. But, anybody that we haven't discussed whose number mildly intrigues you.
Well, I mean, to hit on Ryan Blaney, Phil brought this up, Full Tank with Phil. He's got a podcast, and he brought up something interesting tonight. And he said that this is the first time that Logano hasn't been in the playoffs, and Blaney has been. And so we know that teams have a finite set of resources. What happens if Penske does put all of their resources into Ryan Blaney? Does that elevate him to, maybe a top?
Here's why I'll play devil's advocate to that. And I don't want to cut off your thought. If I'm Team Penske, am I allocating my resources to Blaney this week, or am I putting everything into Las Vegas to get Blaney into the final 4?
Yeah.
That's kind of my thought process
that's a
there
good
for
point.
the 12, knowing how well that they've run there with the Pennzoil 400. The 22 has performed well.
That's a good point.
I'm not saying that's what Penske's going to do, but that's what my thought process would be. Hey, Ryan, go out there and run. It'd be great if you get a stage point or something like that. But our focus right now is getting you the win at Vegas if we can.
That's a good point. So I guess instead of talking about him specifically this week, I never thought he'd be a threat to win this week. But maybe when it comes to the championship, if Blaney goes out there and shows speed at Las Vegas, well, he'd go up there and win Phoenix. I mean,
there's no doubt about it.
I think that if he wins Las Vegas, or at least looks fast at Vegas, where he's competitive, maybe leading laps, I think if you're Byron, Larson, Hamlin, or whoever's continuing, you have to look out because Blaney has been fast as hell at Phoenix in the past. And he
may have been the fastest car. He may have been the fastest car at Phoenix last year, but it just felt like he was running interference to try and allow Logano to win the championship.
Well, I mean, first of all, no one passed Blaney all day. Yep. So if Logano is staying ahead of Blaney last year at the championship race, Chastain wasn't going to be able to pass Blaney. So not one car passed him all day. So we know that there's enough speed there in that 12 car to get it done come Phoenix. If the speed's there, right? Like, I think that the talent's there. I guess I should say if the speed is there. I think we're going to find out at Las Vegas if these Penske resources are able to kind of turn around the Ford speed. It'll be interesting to see. I thought it was a really interesting take, and I thought it was really clever for Phil to bring that up. So I want to make sure I give him credit on that.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely worth considering. There is no doubt about it that there are some unique circumstances for a couple of drivers to have the opportunity to get to the next round and then obviously set their sights on making the Final Four. But that's part of what makes the Roval so intriguing as a cutoff race this coming weekend. You can follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod and subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered directly to your inbox, absolutely free every single Friday throughout the course of football season. And Wormser, it's time for the best bet portion of the program, kind sir. A little bit more predictable, and I use that term in quotation marks as we go to the Roval. But what, in terms of the pre-week betting market, has caught your eye?
I'm sticking with my boy Ty Gibbs. I think that Ty Gibbs, top 10. Now, this is where price is important. At MGM, they have him at plus 110. I like that price. There's other places that have him top 10 at minus 150. I don't like that price. So if you can find that, get your hands on something at like minus 120 or better on Ty Gibbs. He, like I said, he has the third best average finish of relevant comp tracks. He's done nothing but kind of improve as a driver, especially on road courses this year. And he has nothing but a win in mind. So he's never going to give up track position. I think that's really important. If you're going to be taking someone top 5 or top 10, they can't give up any damn track position. Otherwise, they're going to be behind the 8 ball, especially if it's hard to pass. Now, you throw a caution with 5 to go and then all hell breaks loose. But I just think if this race runs green, for the most part, I think Ty Gibbs hangs around the top 10 all day, if not the top 5.
Hey, look, we've seen the 54 continue to mature before our very eyes, and we know the talent is there. Speed has been in those JGR Toyotas at road courses this year, unlike what we saw last season where they felt like sitting ducks nearly every single week. We saw that unfold. So sometimes there's a lot of value to be gleaned to going outside of the playoff race, and Ty Gibbs fits that bill this particular weekend. We'll see how some of these guys qualify and what the betting board looks like when it resets Saturday afternoon. All right, my friend, final words of wisdom, advice, nuggets that you'd like to share with the loyal listeners.
Oh, I am so excited to be done with this round. I am just licking my chops for the final 4 races after this. I love Vegas. I love Homestead. I love Martinsville, and Phoenix is all right. But these last couple weeks it's been tough. Texas, Talladega, let's get our boy Larson here, just a couple of solid finish, move on to the next round. And then the real racing starts. I think that these last 3 races before Phoenix are incredible. So, I'm just really excited to see what happens this weekend, and the amount of chaos that can ensue at the end of these Roval races with some of the stuff we've seen in the past with Johnson wrecking Truex and Kyle Larson limping it around with like 3 wheels and getting into the playoffs, and last year having Cole Custer slow down to block Austin Dillon to then to let Chase Briscoe go by him and get into the playoffs. It's just shenanigans. So I hope that we're on the good end of the shenanigans, but it's certainly entertaining to watch.
I'm going to pistol whip the next son of a bitch that says shenanigans. These parts. Hey, Farva, what's the name of that place you like so much? Oh, you mean Shenanigans? Super Troopers, everyone. Go watch it if you haven't already seen it. All right, buddy. Best of luck this weekend to you, to me, to all of the loyal Stay Green listeners. And with a Ty Gibbs top 10 ticket in hand at the best price available. Do not lay $1.50. Come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.